Hello, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Lash's Digital Classroom. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, the Reformation. What we're going to talk about here is religious change in early modern Europe. We're going to talk about sort of what came before the Reformations. We'll talk about what changed that allowed the Reformations to take place. And we're going to talk about some ways to conceptualize or think about the Reformations in broad terms. So, everyone knows about Martin Luther and the 95 Theses, and most people know about John Calvin and what he did. But most people are kind of surprised to hear that they weren't the first popular reformers of the church in Europe. Two prominent reformers were John Wycliffe, who was around in the 14th century. He was English, and like Luther and like Calvin, he was fiercely anti-clerical. Also like Luther and Calvin, he believed in a Bible-centric religion, that everyone should be able to read the Bible, and therefore the Bible should be printed in the vernacular or the common language. He created lawlessism and was executed by the church as a heretic. Another prominent person prior to the Reformation was Savonarola. Now, Savonarola was popular in Florence during the Renaissance, which is interesting because he attacked clerical corruption, but he also attacked the growing materialism of Florentine society. Remember, the Renaissance, you have all these great works of art being produced, all this wealth in Florence. Remember the Medicis and the money that they were bringing in. And yet here you have this guy as sort of almost a counter-movement, arguing that they need to get rid of those material possessions. And Savonarola would host what we called bonfires of the vanity. The community would get together and burn all of the objects that they felt were sinful. That's the book, The Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe. That's not it. That's the movie based on the book Bonfires. It's an awful movie. It's really bad. There we go. This is a frieze showing the bonfires. And what people would throw in there would be works of art, expensive furniture, mirrors, jewelry, expensive clothing, anything that they felt took you away from the worship of God. When we look at these two guys, we see many of the ideas that became very popular during the Reformation. They were both anti-clerical in a way, even though Savonarola was a Dominican monk. They were opposing the corruption of the church. Savonarola would actually share with John Calvin the disdain for ornate imagery in churches. John Wycliffe would support Luther in wanting to put the Bible into the vernacular. So why then did these two men not create the Reformation? Well, let's look at what changed. First, we're going to have the creation of the movable type printing press. What the printing press is going to do is it's going to allow the mass production of not only the Bible, which will become very popular, but also books about the Bible, books about theology, books about philosophy, books about how should you pray. So ideas about religion are going to be able to be distributed to much larger segments of the population. The other major change that's going to happen is we're going to begin to see the development of the state. And with the state comes centralized political entity. Right? We're talking about complex bureaucracy. We're talking about governments that have the ability to enforce specific messages. We also have humanism and the Renaissance promoting ideas of individuality, ideas of personal development and cultivation. And then finally we have the creation of university, places where people will study and think and talk about religion and what various religions mean. So when we talk about the Reformations, there are two main themes I want you to keep in mind. The first is the rise of individual piety, and the second is the confessionalization of the state. For those of you taking notes, don't worry. Your spell check will not accept confessionalization of the state. So, when we talk about a rise of individual piety, we're at the same time talking about a decline in communal values. Right? During the medieval period, everything was about the community. When you got married as part of your entire community. Your entire town was there. In fact, today when you go to confession, it's in a private booth. But during the medieval period, confession would be done in front of the entire congregation of the church. It was a communal sacrament. We also see is the idea that you are responsible for your soul. That is, unless you're a Calvinist, in which case God is responsible for your election and you have nothing to do with it. But what I mean is that we're going to see in the various religions that develop the idea that the individual, not the community, is accountable. So in Lutheranism, what this means is that salvation is only going to come through faith alone. They're going to see a decline in the idea of good works and all these other things. Really, it's faith. And how do you develop your faith? By reading the Bible, by prayer, by personal communication with God. That's really what Lutheranism is going to stress. The Catholic Church is going to sort of agree salvation does come through faith, but you also need good works. So what we're going to see is very differing views on that, where Lutheranism says salvation through faith alone, Catholicism, salvation through faith and good works, and in Calvinism, you don't really have a say in a matter. It's up to God. So this idea of individual piety, it's going to combine humanism and the individualism of the Renaissance. And what we see in this is that individual actions matter. Reading the Bible, personal prayer. And as I said before, in terms of Catholicism, right, we're going to see that focus on the personal nature of the sacraments, the relationship between God and you. On the other hand, we have the confessionalization of the state. Now, the state is going to begin to shape religion within its borders. What I mean is that these central authorities, these kings, they're not content with simply being in charge of politics and law and culture. They want to control everything that happens inside their borders. And they want everyone in their country to practice the same religion in the same way that they do. Lutheranism will reflect the traditional German values and the Bible of the German princes. The Catholic Church in Spain and France is going to reflect those values. But keep in mind, places like Spain, the Spanish Inquisition is Spanish. It reports to the King of Spain, not to the Pope. And of course, the greatest example of this is going to be the English Reformation, where the king says, I am the head of the church, not the Pope. So if we were to kind of do a brief overview and review of the various Reformations, we have the Lutheran Reformation, started by Martin Luther, right? It's primarily German, and in it, Luther will promote regional authority, both political authority and religious authority. Calvinism will begin in Geneva, and it's going to focus on local authority. Calvinism is going to begin in Geneva, and it's going to focus on local authority. Now, it's also going to become popular with noblemen who seek to keep out royal authority, who want to maintain their local authority, right? We see this with the Huguenots in France in the late 16th century and the Presbyterians of Scotland who followed John Knox. Now, there's the English Reformation, which was primarily political and less radical and more moderate than either the Lutheranism or Calvinism. And finally, there's the Catholic Reformation, Counter-Reformation, which is so complex that I'm going to have to talk about it in another YouTube video. So I want to thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Mr. Lash's Digital Class.